Now, in the process of growth, the inner lining of the neurotube which is formed is going to have a group of cells, we call it neuroepithelial cells. The neuroepithelial cells will start to undergo a process of proliferation. In their proliferation, they are going to give rise to other cells which will be part of the central nervous system. The neuroepithelial cells, the first point, it will proliferate, so the immediate layer next to the lumen of this tube is called the neuroepithelial layer. The neuroepithelial cells in the neuroepithelial layer they're going to multiply or proliferate, and they start migrating to the outer part of the tube. So the immediate layer where they settle next to the neuroepithelial layer, we call it the mantle layer. Now the cells reaching the mantle layer, they are the precursors of neurons, so they will be called neuroblast. So meaning neuroepithelial cells in the neuroepithelial layer proliferate to give neuroblasts that migrate to give the neuroblast layer, which is with the mantle layer. Now the immature neurons will have cell bodies and processes. Now, most of the bodies of these growing neuroblasts are going to be in the mantle layer, but their extension or processes are going to go beyond the point of the mantle layer, and it will form for us the marginal layer. So at this point now, we have the neurotube which is having three layers: the neuroepithelial layer, the mantle layer, and the marginal layer. Now, the marginal layer is formed mainly by the processes of the cells which are found in the mantle layer. Mantle layer consists of neuroblasts which are migrated from the neuroepithelial layer. As the process of migration of neuroblasts from the neuroepithelial layer to mantle layer proceed, some areas there is high level migrations compared to other layers. So when we observe the neurotube in a cross section, we are going to have 4 points of aggregations of neuroblasts, which are going to form for us what we call plates. These 4 points are 2 on either side. The growing fetus, we talk of it in terms of ventral and dorsal side. So ventral, that is the side which is the anterior part of the mature person. The dorsal is the posterior part. So we don't use posterior and anterior because the fetus keep changing position. We can't base on one anatomical position. At the ventral side, we are going to have 2 plates on either sides. That is on either sides of the midline. So those ones, we call them the basal plates. The basal plates are on either side, and they consist of aggregated neuroblasts in the mantle layer. Then we have in the dorsal side, we have what we call the Alar plates. Alar is standing for wing, and remember, wing is mainly found on the dorsal side. So the Alar plates are found on the posterior, the dorsal side, which is the incoming or the future posterior side. Now, in the process of this cell aggregating, as we shall see in the structure of the spinal cord, the different structure in the spinal cord will arise from these aggregated cells. Now, starting from the ventral side, where we have the basal plates, we have neurons in the basal plates, which is the ventral. These neuroblasts are going to start developing processes on all directions, and the processes some will be pointing towards the inner part of the lumen, some will be pointing towards the outer side. The one pointing inside, we call it the central processes. The one pointing out, we call it the peripheral processes. So in the peripheral process, then we have also the central processes. So the peripheral processes of the ventral side, which is coming from the basal plates, are going to penetrate through the mantle layer, and finally through the marginal layer to come out on the ventral side of the developing spinal cord, and it's going to form for us the anterior root of the spinal nerve, which is also known as the motor root of the spinal nerve. So it means the anterior motor nuclei in the spinal cord are derived from the cells of the basal plates. Remember, spinal nerve consists of two roots, the anterior and the posterior. But we have seen the anterior root is already being formed by processes of cells from the basal plates. So when we go to the dorsal side where we're having the Alar plates, it's not the same mechanism like it happened in the ventral side. The posterior root of the spinal nerve does not come from the cells of the Alar plates. The cells of the Alar plates, they also develop different processes, but their processes always either descend up or down, that is, goes on the cranial side or the caudal side, and they will form association neurons. Association meaning they connect different segments of the developing spinal cord, which you shall see as we are looking at the interneurons of the spinal cord. Now, to develop the posterior root of the spinal nerve, in the process of development, we are talked of the neurofolds. So on either side along the neurofolds in the entire length of the neural plate, we have another group of cells of ectodermal origin also, which are called the neurocrest cells. The neurocrest cells, they also come and aggregate on either sides of the developing neural plate on the neurofold. So these cells, having us form the Alar plates, for them they remain on the outer surface of this developing spinal cord. So the neurocrest cells, when they reach the point of around the neurofold, and after fusion of the neurofold to form the neurotube, for them they remain outside, and they also differentiate to give us neuroblast cells. Part of 50% of it aggregate to form neuroblast cells. The remaining percent will form what we call the stellate cells. Now, in the neuroblasts, which are formed from the neurocrest cells, are going to develop also both central process and peripheral process. The central process of these neuroblasts derived from the neurocrest cells are going to penetrate through the marginal layer, and it enters the mantle layer. Now those processes are going to end up moving through the zones of the spinal cord, and it ascends to higher centers, and it's going to form for us what we call ascending tracts. Part of it is going to enter and synapse with the neurons, which are found in the mantle layer of this developing spinal cord. Now the peripheral processes of these neuroblast cells, which are derived from the neurocrest cells, they also curve and ventrally or anteriorly in this non-immature person, and they unite with the peripheral process of the anterior group of neuroblasts, which had come from the basal plates. When they unite, they now form the root, so they will now form the exact spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve is now having its two processes, the two roots. That is the one from the anterior side derived from basal plates, one from the ventral side, the dorsal side, which is coming from the cells of the neurocrest cells, which is differentiated to give us neuroblast. Now, these neuroblasts derived from neurocrest cells, their cell bodies, when they aggregate outside, they form for us the posterior root ganglion. So posterior root ganglion is not a derivative of neuroblasts in the mantle layer. For them, they come from the neurocrest cells. And I repeat there that posterior root of the spinal nerve does not come from cells of the Alar plates. Get to that one to understand well. Still in the neuroepithelial layer, we still have our neuroepithelial cells which are constantly differentiating. So these cells, when after they have given neuroblast cells and formed the different neurons, and also the spinal nerve as we have been talking about, they start to differentiate to another group of cells we call glioblasts. Glioblasts are like the precursors for formation of the glial cells. Glial cells are the supportive cells. So the glioblasts, which have differentiated from neuroepithelial cells, are going to migrate to the mantle layer. Those that reach the mantle layer are going to form a group of glial cells we call astrocytes. So the astrocytes, we are going to have to form what we call the protoplasmic astrocytes, and also we have the fibrillar astrocytes. Those are from the glioblasts that reached in the mantle layer. Other glioblasts proceed further to reach the marginal layer. Those in the marginal layer are going to form for us a group of cells we call oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes are the cells responsible for forming myelin sheath in the central nervous system. Now, the mantle layer of the developing spinal cord will in future give us the gray matter of the spinal cord. The marginal layer, since they are containing mainly fibers, they will give us the white matter of the spinal cord. So meaning the spinal cord, the white matter is found on the outer surface, the gray matter is found in the inner surface. Now, the cells of the neuroepithelial layer, after giving rise to neuroblasts and glioblasts, the remaining cells are going to differentiate and form for us ependymal cells. So ependymal cells are formed from the remnant of the neuroepithelial cells after giving rise to the glioblast and neuroblast. The ependymal cells, they line the inner lumen. Now, this developing spinal cord, the lumen that is going to be formed will future give us the spinal canal, which is the cavity of the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord, as it's developing, outside it is also having another group of cells which are from the mesoderm, which is going to give us rise to the vertebral column. So the spinal cord develop alongside with the vertebra. In the early weeks of development, the spinal cord and the vertebral column, they had the same length, and the spinal cord fills the entire vertebral canal. But during growth, there is disproportionate expansion in that the spinal cord expands at a slower rate than the vertebral column. That's why in a mature person, the spinal cord ends at a higher level than the vertebral column. So we shall see in a neonate, the spinal cord can end as low as level 3, L3. Meanwhile, in an adult, it always ends at the lower border of L1. Meaning, as you grow, the spinal cord expands at a slower rate compared to the vertebral column. We have talked of the Alar plates and the Basal plates, but also some group of cells migrate to the mantle layer, but in the intermediate area between the Alar plates and the Basal plates on either side. These cells are mainly found between the second thoracic segment of the spinal cord downward to the second level of the lumbar segment of the spinal cord. These cells are going to give rise to the sympathetic nervous system, that is sympathetic outflow from the spinal cord, and they are also part of the mantle layer, which meaning they are part of the gray matter of the spinal cord.